Chloroquine is an old medication. It's been around since the 1940s, and its main use today is to fight malaria, although it's also used in several other diseases like lupus. It's been known for some time now that chloroquine has in vitro activity against viruses. Now, in vitro means in the lab, in a test tube or a petri dish. In other words, if you grow a colony of viruses in the lab and you put some chloroquine on it, the colony dies. We even know the mechanism by which chloroquine exerts its antiviral effects, but the only value of in vitro studies is to prove the theoretical possibility of a drug working. You cannot jump to conclusions about its efficacy in a living, breathing human, which is a far more complex biological system than a simple test tube or a petri dish. In vitro studies are literally the first step in investigating the effectiveness of antivirals and antibacterials. They are not the last step. In the SARS outbreak in 2003, which was also caused by a strain of the coronavirus, there was interest in the medical community about using chloroquine for its treatment. And this again was based on the theoretical effectiveness demonstrated by in vitro studies. That interest, of course, went away when the SARS epidemic ended and further research never moved forward. Now, with the current COVID-19 outbreak, interest in the antiviral properties of chloroquine were revived, and Chinese doctors have been using it in their patients. Now, besides China, there is no other country that is reporting any significant experience with chloroquine at the time of making this video. And unfortunately, the Chinese recommendations are not very transparent. Now, this is one of the first publications from China regarding chloroquine for COVID-19, and as you can see, it's more of an editorial letter and not the result of some well-designed trial. And it states boldly that chloroquine phosphate has shown apparent efficacy in the treatment of COVID-19 associated pneumonia in clinical studies. But the optimistic title notwithstanding, if you look carefully, this position seems itself to be based on a February 17th news briefing by the State Council of China. And then when you go down to the source of this, you find that it's just an audio transcript of the news briefing. Now, the letter goes on to state that results from more than 100 patients have demonstrated that chloroquine phosphate is superior in promoting a virus-negative conversion and shortening the disease course. But this, too, was just according to that news briefing. And then they go on to assert that this was all apparently the conclusion of trials done in several Chinese hospitals, but when you actually go through the trial registry listed in this letter, the trials cannot be found. Now, after this, the next big news came about on the 20th of February when the Department of Science and Technology of Guangdong Province and Health Commission of Guangdong Province published a consensus paper stating that it was their position and recommendation that chloroquine be administered for COVID-19 illness because they felt that it was an effective treatment. Now, if you go through this paper, it first describes the in vitro antiviral studies that I first mentioned. This is not new information. We've known this for over 15 years. But then it goes straight into making a recommendation for chloroquine based on these in vitro studies, as well as, quote, our recent clinical practice. And unfortunately, it doesn't go into any detail about what this clinical practice is. Now, I don't mean to suggest that these statements are wrong or that we shouldn't listen to them because we don't have detailed descriptions of the current Chinese experience with chloroquine. After all, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and a meticulous documentation of such early experiences might be asking too much. But the good news is that China is undergoing multiple trials in several hospitals. So it seems that the scientific community is making a huge effort to clarify this question. There are over 20 trials going on right now, and the Chinese government is attempting to standardize them so that data coming out of them is as robust as possible. No information from these trials has emerged so far, as they all just started a few weeks ago. I did manage to track down the principal investigators of 5 of these trials, and I emailed them asking if they'd be able to share their initial impressions, but I haven't heard back from them yet. If I do, I'll make an update in the comments below. Now, Bill Gates was also recently asked this question in an AMA on Reddit, and he knows a thing or two about chloroquine because he's waged a war on malaria for over 2 decades. He responded that chloroquine is, quote, not proven, but he seems to be aware of the very preliminary reports coming out of China on this subject. So that's all we know so far. In a nutshell, the situation as it stands is that there have been some unsubstantiated statements made by the Chinese, and those are now being followed up over there with clinical trials to see if there's anything to them. Because the COVID-19 illness has such a rapidly moving clinical course, if the drug really is dramatically effective, we will know soon, maybe in a few weeks. And then other centers will begin their own trials in other parts of the world, and the scientific community will rapidly approach at a data-driven consensus on this question. But I'm already seeing some news articles out there these days hyping this up and acting like it's already a proven therapy. And I'd like to urge caution here and make sure that we don't jump into any premature conclusions. I, just as much as the next person, would love for an inexpensive, familiar drug with a good side effect profile to be key to unlocking this dilemma. But the fact of the matter is that we simply need more information before we're able to make that claim.